Hey there, Seb by the Realtor here. Hey, have you heard the news? There's been a lot of headlines recently about commissions for real estate buyer's agents. If you want to find out why you should definitely still pay a buyer agent commission, then you are for sure going to want to watch this video. Hey, before I get started, I just want to let you know that I've actually been kind of sick for the last couple of weeks, really. I have pneumonia, and I'm getting better. I'm largely recovered, but certainly still not all the way there. So if I seem a little more spaced out than usual, that's the reason why. But without further ado, let me just say that, there have been a number of commission lawsuits recently, and I think there's, 23 coast to coast, something like that, against the National Association of Realtors and many real estate brokerages, my own, Compass included. And a week or two ago, there was an announcement of a settlement, and the settlement has not been approved yet. But the settlement will mean that sellers will no longer be required to offer buyer's agents a commission, right? So buyer's agents can still be paid a commission by the buyer or by the seller, but the MLS will no longer be allowed to be the mechanism by which buyer's agents are guaranteed a commission if they bring a buyer, the seller accepts the offer, and the sale closes. And so there have been many lurid, sensational headlines going around. Here's a few of them you can read as I'm talking about how this means the end of the 6% commission. So I don't know what 6% commission they're talking about, but apparently the media feels that 6% is a standard commission from coast to coast and that this will mean the end of that. Of course, there is no standard commission. There never has been a standard commission. There is certainly an average commission, and of course, average is a mathematical function. It's a fact, and I don't actually know what the average commission might be from coast to coast, and I'm pretty sure it varies quite a bit regionally and within certain types of property like land or mobile homes or single-family homes and price ranges, right? So I really don't think that there is ever a standard commission. Never has been one. I don't really think so, but of course there has been an average commission. But let me just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of this lawsuit, these lawsuits, because there's more than one. Basically, it comes down to the requirement that a seller had to offer at least some compensation to a buyer's broker in order for the home to be listed on a realtor-owned a Realtor Association-owned multiple listing service. Most multiple listing services are owned by Realtor Associations, and these multiple listing services are what feed Zillow and Redfin and Trulia, and basically every real estate portal on the internet is powered by a syndication of multiple listing services. So it used to be that you would have to offer the buyer's agent at least some compensation to be listed on the multiple listing service. Well, that is gone now. Under the terms of these proposed settlements, you will no longer have to offer any compensation to a buyer's agent on the multiple listing service. And in fact, it is actually prohibited to use the MLS as a mechanism by which you can offer compensation to the buyer's agent. It used to be, and actually it still is today, as of the day that I'm recording this video, that when you would offer the buyer's agent compensation through the multiple listing service, that buyer would receive that amount of compensation at close of escrow, and that is no longer going to be the case going forward. It will not be possible to offer that compensation on the multiple listing service. However, a seller can still offer compensation to a buyer's agent. It just can't be communicated through the multiple listing service or guaranteed through the multiple listing service. But I want to address the question of, should the seller be paying the buyer's agent? Well, I just want to say that for decades now, maybe at least about 40 years, ever since we've had this sort of formalized system where a buyer gets representation from a buyer's agent, and that buyer's agent is paid by the seller, or has been usually paid by the seller, to represent that buyer's interests. Ever since we have had that system, the system has been predicated on the notion that the seller would have to offer the buyer's agent at least $1 in compensation in order to get the home listed on the multiple listing service. That's it, $1. This whole commission lawsuit is about the requirement that sellers had to offer through the brokers, through their listing broker, at least $1 in compensation. So that's been going on now for about 40 years here in California anyway, and I'm not sure how it works other places, but I assume it works largely similarly. Ever since then, for the past 40 years, sellers have had that choice to offer to pay only $1 to the buyer's agent, but now they cannot offer only $1 to the buyer's agent through the MLS. They can't offer any amount of money to the buyer's agent through the MLS. But despite the fact that for the past 40 years, sellers have only had to offer $1 to the buyer's agent, it has been very, very rare to see a listing on the multiple listing service where the seller only offered $1. And it's not only $1. They could have offered $1,000 or $10,000 or 1%. That was always an option. For the past 40 years, sellers could have always offered this amount of the commission, of the total commission paid to the listing agent through the MLS. But in point of fact, for 40 years, it's been very, very rare to ever see a seller offer $1 of compensation. And so now we're going to go to a situation where a seller no longer has to offer $1. They can't offer really anything through the MLS, but they can offer it through other mechanisms. Why is it all of a sudden going to be that sellers are going to stop offering compensation to buyer's agents when they never really had to before? They had to offer only a token amount, but that was very, very rare. In my 21 years in the real estate business, I can think of, I don't even know, 3 or 4 times maybe when I have seen a $1 offer of compensation. I have more often seen $1,000 or $10,000 or 1%, say, of the purchase price to the buyer's agent for the fee. All of these numbers would be considered low, because remember I said that there is in fact an average commission, because an average is a mathematical function, right? It's not a standard, right? I'm not saying it's typical. I'm just saying that there is an average because, again, average is a function of math. The average commission that I have seen in my 21 years in the real estate business is generally, shocker, between 2 and 3% offered to the buyer's agent. Somewhere in there, on average, is what I have personally seen from my anecdotal experience that other agents have been offering to buyer's agents, when this whole time they only had to offer $1. So why is it for the past 40 years, when sellers only had to offer $1 to the buyer's agent, have they in fact been offering an average of, say, 2 or 3%? I think that there is a big misconception about the nature of the relationship between a buyer's agent and the seller. Here in California, it is actually possible to have dual representation, where the listing agent can also represent the buyer and be their agent as well. A lot of people say, well, why is that possible? And the reason why is because it is not an adversarial relationship. Both the buyer and the seller, they have the same goal. They want to effect the sale and transfer of the property from the seller to the buyer. When you have a buyer's agent, the goal is still the very same. They want the same thing. And in fact, you are incentivizing the buyer's agent through the payment of that commission to actually make that happen. Make sure it happens at the terms that were agreed upon in the contract. Some people may think that the buyer's agent's job is to actually get the buyer the best price possible for the home. And that may be true in some places like Alabama, I don't know, but in California, where for a very, very long time we have had a low amount of inventory, where the market has been super competitive, the agent's job is actually not to get the lowest price for the property. The agent's job is to get the property for the buyer, and what that usually means in California is coaching the buyer not on how little they will have to pay, but the exact opposite. how much they will have to pay in order to beat out the competition. The agent's job actually is to make sure that that buyer is writing a really competitive offer, and that usually means a pretty darn high price, but also really great terms for the seller, not for the buyer. The agent's job, the buyer's agent's job, is to craft an offer that the seller is going to love better than any other offer. Buyer's agents actually help to drive the price higher for the seller. If you don't have a buyer's agent, an agent on that side who the buyer trusts, who is explaining to the buyer the realities of the market and what they need to do in order to beat out all the competition, then you are going to end up with buyers who are not going to be offering as much. There won't be as much competition for your property. Agents are the people who drive that competition for you to help you get the highest price possible and the best terms on the sale of your property. But let's imagine a situation where there aren't actually 10 offers on your property, where there is just one offer on your property from that one buyer. Maybe you've been on the market for 2 or 3 months and there still is only one buyer for the property. Now, what is that agent's job? Is that agent's job to grind you down and rake you over the coals and get you a really terrible offer? Well, I can tell you what, the buyer is probably thinking that this is an opportunity to do just exactly that, but they will have their buyer's agent who will be telling them, hey, the reality is very few lowball offers are actually accepted. If you want to get your offer accepted, if you want to get a deal here, you're going to have to come up with a price and terms that are acceptable to the seller. The buyer's agent will be coaching the buyer on the realities, again, of the market and what they need to do to make a compelling offer to the seller, taking into consideration, of course, that there does not seem to be a gigantic demand for the property, but nevertheless, the buyer's agent will be there making sure that they are going to put an offer together that can actually work, that is not just a joke, that is not something that's going to be laughed off the table, that is not something that's going to shut the seller down where the seller says, like, what is this? I'm not going to talk to this buyer anymore. That's what buyer's agents do, regardless of how the market is, whether it's hot or cold, multiple offers or just one offer. The buyer's agent is always looking to put a deal together that will work, that will win, that will get to the closing table. And once they're under contract, the deal is not done by no means. There are many, many things the buyer's agent will need to do, holding hands and making sure they're getting their earnest money deposited on time, making sure that the inspections are ordered, making sure that they do all the myriad things that buyer's agents do in order to keep their buyer on track and moving constantly to the closing table where the seller finally gets paid. It makes total sense for the seller to pay the buyer's agent because most of the time the buyer's agent is doing the seller's bidding. They are doing what the seller wants to get done. Of course, the buyer wants to get done as well. And absolutely all the money in the transaction is ultimately coming from the buyer, right? The buyer is the only person putting cash into the deal. So in effect, in one way of looking at it, the buyer is always paying the commission anyway. And by the way, it's never been the case that a buyer's agent always receives the commission. I have seen many times in the private remarks where it will say, buyer's agent waived the commission, and that means that the effective sale price would have been, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 higher because the buyer did not take that commission. The buyer used that buyer's agent commission as a negotiating point. That's always been possible. When would that happen? That would happen typically in the case where the agent themselves was a buyer, or they had a family member, a wife perhaps, or a mother or a child or a brother or somebody in the family who agreed to waive the commission in order to make that offer more competitive. That's always been the case, and that may be more of the case going forward, but it's not really any different than anything that we've had this whole entire time. But most of the time, a seller is going to want to make sure that they pay the buyer's agent because that is money very well spent. All right, well, that is all I have for this video. I hope you have enjoyed watching it. And if by any slim chance you have enjoyed watching it, you might also enjoy some of these videos over here. These are some of the most popular videos here on my YouTube channel, so please do check those out. All right, thank you so very much for watching. I certainly do appreciate it. And please, stay tuned.